Welcome to the Scalable Marketing Machine podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Hajar, marketing consultant for female founders and creator of the Scalable Marketing Machine Accelerator. I've helped dozens of women grow and scale their businesses from 6 to 7 figures and beyond, helping founders like you to implement my proven growth system that focuses on brand communication, marketing strategy, building your lean team, and leadership. On this podcast, we talk all about what it takes to get to the next level in marketing and in life, focusing on practical, tactical advice that will help you grow your business and explode your revenue. Are you ready to learn? Let's dive in.
Okay, and we're live. And welcome to this week's episode of the Scalable Marketing Machine podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Hajar, and today I have a huge treat because we are joined by Jake Madoff, a growth marketing specialist who I've had the pleasure of working with personally, and we've been able to get our hands dirty together with clients. But we're here to talk all things growth marketing, conversions, revenue, how to get things to work. So Jake, why don't you take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, share a little bit about you as a growth marketer, and what are the sort of the things that you do as it pertains to growth marketing?
For sure. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. My name is Jake. I'm a growth marketer based in NYC. Most technically, I'm what's called a full stack marketer, which means I do paid social, paid search, SEO, and CRO. Most of my work is focused on paid social and paid search. Paid social is ads on Meta, Facebook and Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn. Paid search, of course, is Google, Google Shopping, a little bit of Bing, and then SEO, mostly on-page work, and CRO is conversion rate optimization. So how can you increase conversion rate along a funnel, whether it's an e-commerce funnel or sales funnel? And of course, always with paid social is acting as a creative director for performance marketing, where you have to give recommendations as to what works. The biggest lever for paid social is your creative. So having some intuition, some idea of how to communicate data-driven results with creative is really important and part and parcel of my paid social work. Again, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've worked with a handful of brands, Bespoke Post, Home Nutrition, Hims and Hers, Home Chef, Trademark Engine, pretty much across D2C and B2B as well.
Wow. Okay, so first I want to start with first, before we get into it, I want to recommend, like, for any founders listening, like when I'm building marketing teams, I always feel like there are two core positions that each team should have. And I categorize it as like a head of paid and a head of organic. So Jake would be really representative of this, like, head of paid. And I think that when you look at it sort of in a very narrow view, when you're just like looking at someone to manage your advertising, I think you're really missing the mark, because so much of what you do with your ads and the performance of the ads depends on the performance of the full funnel. And the full funnel includes your landing pages, right? Your website, how people are navigating, the checkout experience. Like, all of that at the end of the day is going to affect how your ads are converting into paying, because that's what KPI you're responsible for. So if, like, the definition of a lean team, if you only needed 2 folks on your team, I think someone really focused on organic and someone's focused on that full funnel, right? That paid side. So let's talk about ads. I would love, as this experienced ad manager, for you to wrap about a little bit what you've been seeing in how you approach ads. How has that changed over the past couple of years? And let's speak specifically to this, anyone that really started with ads in like 2020 around COVID, because so much has changed since then. And I feel like it's such a huge pain point for so many founders of just what the deal is with ads these days. So what have you been observing?
Yeah, for sure. And I just did a podcast on 2024 trends. So I'm going to be curious. So, almost halfway through the year now, some are seeming to prove out, some more obvious than others. But to start with, paid media in let's bucket it as 2014 to 2016. Yeah. Those were really early days for paid media. Meta, their product was called the Power Editor, if you remember those days where It wasn't even called, they had like a separate thing for ads manager and something else called the power editor. It was very early on at that point. CPMs were very low. Organic was really king at that time. Around like 2016 to 2019, that period of time, platforms became more sophisticated. Things like lookalike targeting rolled out. You had new campaign build types, so you could actually do more sophisticated conversion targeting, more sophisticated targeting as well, in addition to conversion tracking. That became kind of like a really interesting golden era of growth marketing, that 2016 to 2019 period. CPMs were still low. There wasn't anything like iOS tracking. It was like the Wild West, but in somewhat of a good way, where platforms were running with pretty clean data capture between the network and your digital property. Then COVID did have an impact. In the first part of COVID, there was an e-commerce bump. You've probably heard that over time. E-commerce at the time, I was at Bespoke Post. We definitely saw a bump in e-commerce traffic over that period of time. Just after COVID, around like 2021 time, you had the iOS 14.5 rollout. You had different California Consumer Protection Acts rollout. You had GDPR compliance rollout, ADA compliance. So there are a lot of other compliance initiatives, all good things for consumers. For advertisers, it did cause gaps in reporting, where the platforms weren't as accurate anymore. And then you had also just a ton of advertisers that come in to the market.
Yeah.
So CPMs increased over the time. So like over the last 3 years, CPMs have increased. You've probably had more of a reliance on third-party attribution tools than in the past, where usually you could just rely on the platform. And then over like the last 6 months, things have really changed with AI automations in the platforms, totally new campaign builds like Performance Max coming out, what's called like advanced or enhanced tracking in platforms, and various different types of campaign builds like Advantage Plus, for example, on Meta. So yeah, very different.
So, okay. And let's dig into that a little bit, because I know, this kind of automated campaign building, or like those pieces of the automation and now infusing with AI, like, do you find that taking advantage of those tools are really helpful? Because I've seen in the past, let's say in my experience with Google, like some of those sort of automated or like let them do it for you tools don't perform as well. But I've seen recently with some of the tools coming out with Meta that they're outperforming, like, and I forget what the product's called, but it was recently launched where they're sort of like, they're doing the targeting for you. It kind of like they're handing it over, you're handing it over to them pretty much all the way. And I've seen some really good like early signs of production with those campaigns. So what's your opinion on kind of letting the platform sort of do some of that like targeting and some of the maybe putting the creative together? I know they already do quite a bit with like choosing headlines and thumbnails and all of that stuff, but what do you see as like the balance or the way that sort of advertisers, right, can best optimize those tools?
Yeah, Meta. So Meta just, I think last week it actually came out publicly, or 2 weeks ago, the Meta AI platform. And you don't even need actually a Facebook to log in, which is unique. So that platform is good. I was a part of some betas for that where we tried that creative. It still looks like a digital rendering. So I don't think Meta quite yet is there on. It's better actually than ChatGPT 4 when I use any of that. I almost never use ChatGPT 4 for ad creative. And it just isn't able to actually get text overlays on ads. Meta is working on that. That's one of the biggest things that product is being worked on now is the text overlays. But what you're referring to, the Advantage Plus campaign type on Meta, the kind of hand it all over to Meta versus do it yourself or manual. Generally speaking, I have had more success doing it manually. The broad targeting that Meta keeps wanting advertisers to go into is really just for a budget and impression standpoint. It's not really from a ROAS standpoint. So there have been times that the Advantage Plus have worked. More often though, I am building my own. I've even done some direct A/B tests between them where it's one advantage and one more manual one.
Yeah.
I do still find success with broader lookalikes, stacking lookalikes, doing some demographic layering. So I don't want to target just 18 plus everyone on the platform. I want to do some demographic layering sometimes, even though those advantage ones will typically default you into 18 plus. So yeah, overall, I do find more success with manual selector targeting on the ad copy side. It's okay, their AI copy generation. It's still going to be, I would still recommend if you want to use an AI, use something like ChatGPT for ad copy, then edit it a bit to add some hooks in. You can even, write a bit of a bot to do that for you. So in terms of the content creation for Meta, their AI tools are not there yet. And the broad targeting is good at getting clicks and impressions. I don't think it's as good yet as some more sophisticated campaign builds like lookalike stacking and demographic layering. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk to now the founder that is really frustrated with ads at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of founders that are in this position where they're still kind of reeling and like hearkening back to the day when like cost per leads, cost per acquisition was way lower than it is now. I think a lot of businesses are feeling the pressure. And I think that there's a lot of just like panic in not knowing exactly like how to play the game. And the game is changing quite frequently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you say to founders who maybe are struggling a little bit, kind of want to throw in the towel on ads? Do you have like a system or a playbook that you can kind of recommend on how you can do some measured improvements or with creative, or what are some of the key factors that people should be testing with if they find that their ads are just stopped working?
Sure. It depends on your platform, like Google versus Meta.
Let's
if
talk
you're a
about
business
Meta.
owner,
Let's talk about Meta, just Meta. Yeah.
if you're a business owner on Meta, let's say you're an e-commerce brand, and your ROAS is below a 1.5, you want to get up to break even, let's say, is typically around a 2 to 2.5, and you want to get above a 2.5 on your ROAS. So if your ROAS is below 1.5, the first thing to look at would be your ad creative. Firstly, let's say the optimization potential of your ad creative, and also the velocity of your ad creative. So it could be an issue where you're publishing 1 or 2 images every month with maybe a 3K budget, monthly budget. That's just not enough to really evolve your creative. Or it could be that you're uploading ad creative that nowadays you could be trying to make it look super polished. It looks like it was done in a studio. It doesn't even have any headline overlays or text overlays. That doesn't do well anymore. You actually kind of need to make it look a little bit more native, and then put some overlays on top of it. So that's the first thing I was look at, is assess their ad creative, and then assess their targeting. Sometimes I've come in where the targeting is, again, totally broad, and maybe they are selling a product for, let's say 4 parents, and they're going after like 18 to 65 plus, where you really want to narrow it at that point.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've come in where the campaign type is a traffic campaign type, i.e. the campaign is optimizing for clicks. That's always going to give you bad results. So whenever I come into a business, I give always like a 30, 60, 90, where a 30-day is really just a testing period. Don't expect any results that are going to meet your benchmarks in that period of time. That is purely testing. Month 2, we can start to pause losers from that testing period. By end of month 3, month 2, we're just running with some of those winners. By end of month 3, then we can start to make some conclusions on the data in that month 3 that we can go into month 4 and start scaling. So
I love that. I love that. So, okay. So what I'm hearing is that, if we find things are like absolutely not working, there's kind of 3 core things to look at. A, we want to look at that creative. We want to really analyze the creative. And I think that that's something that I've run into quite a bit recently, where I think in the past, just having like good enough creative like could produce, but I think really looking with like a keen eye on what is this, like, what is the feeling? What is it conveying? What is the exact messaging, right? I think our viewers are getting much more sophisticated. So starting with the creative, the next is really double down on the audience and making sure that you're really, truly have refined that audience to match your target. And then the third was
your campaign type. Like make sure your tracking is set up correctly. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that these are some ad managers I know maybe don't even communicate all of that really well to the founders. And I think if founders find themselves in that position where they don't know the answers to these things, like they're not involved in the creative, they don't know what's running, they're not sure what it's optimized for. Again, like from profile views to click-throughs to conversions, right? The founder should hold that knowledge to really have that baseline to understand what is going on with the ads. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is something that's came up with us in a meeting this week, but it's come up several times with other founders that I mentor, is this idea of like, well, what creative is really working? And I think that and I did a post on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago that kind of harkened to this idea of, if a video goes viral, right? A viral video, something on the organic side, right? Should be an indicator that we're going to get conversions out of that organic viral video. And maybe there's a thesis statement that says that viral video turned into an ad will do awesome. But what we've seen is that like viral videos don't really produce many conversions, right? Now, it depends on what the context of the viral video is, but oftentimes the viral videos are like dancing and trending audio or something humorous. So talk to us a little bit about, if you have an opinion on, going viral and what kind of creative we really should be producing for ads.
Yeah, there is, it would be like an interesting Venn diagram. Like you're saying, it does depend. So in that Venn diagram, there's definitely some overlap in the center there where you could have a viral trending post organically that works better than your top performing ad creative. Mm-hmm. But yes, on average, I think there will be a difference between what performs well organically and reaches virality versus what performs well in ad creative. And like you're suggesting, typical viral content may not have a clear call to action. It may not really even be expressly for a brand that may really call out the type of product. But that's part of what makes it successful, is because people watching don't think it's for a brand, which helps its virality. Mm-hmm. So how to kind of merge those two concepts together. I have done a handful of let's call it almost like skit style UGC for brands. And we've managed to get it to a point where it performs. So Everytable is a good example of that. It's a food subscription company based in LA. And they worked with content creators where they had skit-based creative about healthy eating or food subscriptions. But it started with, you can almost think of it as like bearing the lead. It starts with something that feels super native. You wouldn't have an idea if it was an ad or not, excluding that it had a little sponsor tag on it. And then maybe 15 seconds into the video, then you start to maybe pick up, oh, the branding is Everytable branding, or oh, it looks like, and then it ends, of course, with a call to action to say, check out Everytable to find healthy meals near you. So I think one tool there is, bearing the lead, begin with strong hooks, keep that user's attention, but at some point you do have to give some type of call to action. You do have to be a bit more specific in mentioning the product or service that you're marketing. And then, definitely run it and test those intros, test those hooks, and see what performs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this all harkens to this idea of, and I've seen this as an overarching trend where, in order for content, I think that we are all being called as marketers to, and founders, right, that are building their businesses, but I think we've been called to create better content. I think there's just an overflow, right? There's so many businesses, there's so much noise online that we're sort of in this position now that social media in and of itself has aged, right? We're sort of maturing, is that I think we find with brands that where in the past, maybe it was enough to just throw anything up there and be consistent or right, just to make the effort. I think that we are, again, being challenged to make better creative, right? And so even the example that you gave with Everytable, it reminds me of really traditional commercials, right? That we're thinking of, and again, it doesn't have to look totally polished. And I would love your opinion on on where the trends are in terms of like polished content versus unpolished content. But I think it's like one thing that we can't deny is that the storytelling is so important. That's what really grabs. Like it's the hooks and it's the storytelling. And I think that if we're looking at our ads underperforming, I think that there's a real opportunity to up the game on the quality of the content. And again, it doesn't have to be highly produced, but there's so many people in the game, in the advertising game, that who's going to stand out now are the ones that do a better job at advertising, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the back end stuff. It's a lot of it is the front end. So what is your opinion now of that sort of idea of really raw and really kind of, turning that maybe UGC content that's like really real into ads versus clients you've worked with that are producing things more polished? Is there anything changing in that trend-wise?
Yeah, for sure. And even just a quick note to the first part of what you were saying, the ad platforms, YouTube, Meta, they are using advertisers now to help create content for the platform. So like pre-2020, ads were distinctly ads. Like you could pick a pocket before 2020, but the platforms weren't like pushing advertisers to make content that people would want to take on, listen to, absorb, etc. It would benefit you. You'd have a higher quality score, higher engagement score, but not nearly to the same prominence and significance as now, where platforms are basically asking and rewarding advertisers to make ads that look like native organic content, so people will stay on their platforms, because all these platforms care about is, are you giving good content that keeps someone on the platform for longer? Yeah. And again, before, ads didn't have nearly the significance in that role that they do now. So in that regard, without a doubt, the more polished creatives, whether it's an image creative, if you're doing like a sophisticated photo shoot, or even a fully produced video ad where you're sitting in a studio and it looks high gloss, for example, that may do well on OTT, TV ads. The photo creative, the image creative may do well in magazines, for example. It's just not going to perform on paid social. I've seen that like time and time again. The creative that, if you want to do polished creative, that is really good for OTT and television, but it's not good for paid social. It will just not perform. It's not going to look native. It's going to get a lower click rate. People will skip it immediately. So it may, and that's why TV and OTT may be better, because it's going to be a bit more brand reinforcing. You have to, in a way, watch that creative, or on paid social, skip right by it. On OTT or television, you will take in a bit more of that messaging. So there's a time and a placement for that. That is not paid social, and that more native route with subtitles, quicker cuts, intros, good hooks, that is definitely better for paid social.
And I think you bring up like such a good point that actually I feel like we all understand like intellectually, but it's hard for us to kind of put into practice, which is like, we are leveraging these platforms as marketers, as founders, to grow our business and grow our audience. But, these platforms, like it's really interesting to dive into like the business structure of the platforms. Like because essentially the algorithm, right, it is controlled by the brand, right? And so it's going to be in line with their business goals, right? And so, yeah, the point of the platform is to keep people on, keep people engaged. That's why it's often so difficult to get, people off platform in general. That's why we have such a hard time putting links in, there's so many restrictions for links that you can put into content and into your profile, and that they limit them and all this stuff, because the platform wants to keep people on platform. That's what makes them money, right? That's why advertisers advertise. And so when we're creating our content, both organically and for paid, we need to keep that in mind. And I think you bring up such a great point where, if we can create really good hooks, really engaging content that looks like it's part of the platform, that it is more native, that's why I think the UGC stuff continues to perform. And I think we've also seen this surgence of just like creators for hire, right? Where they'll, UGC typically is like, I think in the past, the thesis behind it was like, these are real customers that are just like sharing their experience, and we turn that into an ad or we utilize that. Or this is an influencer that we worked at that created this for us or whatever. And now we see a lot of brands investing in just like purely creators who are like almost like paid actors, right? You choose them from Fiverr or whatever, you have a meeting with them, you give them a brief, and they are going to tailor make, you pay them to like make you commercials that look like real stuff. I don't think that, maybe like some marketing teams don't know that that's an option, but a lot of people are really exercising that option, like getting an army of these paid content creators to make these kind of platform style commercials and controlling that message. And that goes back to that idea before of like, if we can control the message, so we're intersecting the viral stuff with more of the product focused stuff that can lead to conversions. But this is the level of sophistication, and why I think the game everyone needs to think about upping their game in terms of the quality of the content. And we kind of go back to this idea where it used to be like social media is real. Like that was what attracted us to it, right? As real as it can be. But now there's just a blurred line between what is kind of prefabricated and created by marketing teams versus what is really authentic, right? Okay. So let's move on from ads a little bit and let's start chatting about the full funnel. So what are some of the mistakes that you see founders making, and maybe some pain that they have with their ads folks if they're not paying attention to the full funnel?
Yes, and e-commerce funnel specifically.
I think we can talk about e-commerce. Yeah, I think that's probably
Yeah, without a doubt, I think on average, when I come into a brand, if it's a small business owner, medium business owner who runs an e-commerce company, let's use sometimes I've worked with aggregator websites. Those are a little bit different than they just have a smaller catalog, let's say 50 or fewer products, and they specialize in a certain product category. I've come along a handful of times where either there's no like quick shop options that are in the collection page or the homepage. Like the only place a user can add to their cart is the PDP, for example, the product details page. That's not optimized. Sometimes even the mobile site isn't QA'd. So I've come on before where if I do a CRO audit, a conversion rate optimization audit, I'm almost always only looking at mobile, sometimes even looking at desktop. 75% plus the traffic is going to be mobile. So there's almost no point in looking at your desktop, because also typically that's what we'll look at. Your desktop is likely to be okay in its rendering versus mobile. Shopify, for example, does have good rendering and good responsive design for that. But make sure your Shopify site or your whatever your e-commerce tool is, WooCommerce, is mobile responsive. And also have like a dedicated system or ecosystem for testing landing pages. So if you have a high enough budget, this is for people maybe spending, over 3K. If you're spending under 2K, focus more on the creative. Of course, hit the low hanging fruit, but you don't need to do as sophisticated. If you're a really small team, maybe 1 or 2 people with a small budget. But if you're starting to scale, you have the bandwidth. Treat your creative testing like you do your landing page testing. Those are in the same bucket in terms of the levers that you can pull to increase your conversion rate and lower your CPA. So in the same way where you have a winning creative on paid social that you've tested for 2 months, bring that creative and learn about the themes, bring that over to your landing page. So let's say that showing this particular style or colorway of a product performs really well, put that on a dedicated landing page. Let's say you see a particular type of headline or messaging angle performs well, put that theme onto your landing page. And then you'll really start to see synchronicity between your ads and your landing pages. And then they will evolve together over time. And of course, click-through rate and conversion rate tends to increase in time as well.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some guidelines for testing? So let's look back to ads. So if we were to say, obviously we always need to be testing creative.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an idea of like, what do you recommend as the cadence for how often should we be getting new creative out there? How many tests do you recommend having? And let's talk about, someone that's a smaller budget, maybe doesn't have like so many resources. What do you think would be a good starting point so founders can feel like their effort is honorable?
For sure. Yeah, I wrote an article on this and kind of tried to break it into buckets because it really does depend. Budget is your biggest dependent variable in that question, where like you're suggesting, if you're a smaller business owner, maybe spending 2 to 3K per month, you can get away with uploading 2 to 4 images and 2 to 3 videos per month. And that is probably going to be okay with your performance. But let's say for the medium-sized business owners, maybe spending 5 to 50K a month, somewhere in that range. Obviously, there's some variation within that range because that's a big range. But you should be testing monthly at minimum in that range. And the number of placements should span across image and video. Before, I'd maybe be okay with being super heavy on video. But actually, of the last like year and a half, 2 years, I've seen an emergence of or a reemergence of image creative, where now it's really important to have both.
Yeah. I want to double click on that because I was thinking about that this past week and kind of analyzing it a little bit. And I feel like the why behind that is that like everything is video now. Like everything is video, really. Like everyone's just on Reels or on Stories, for example, with Instagram. So actually the thumb, like your thumb tip, like the thing that grabs attention now, I think is oftentimes still images because it's something that's different in the feed. Like, and it kind of breaks that automated response. So I think that's really interesting that you're seeing that as well. How about when it comes, okay, so we're hearing that like 2 to 3 videos and images for like this kind of sub 3K realm. I'm changing that out each month, like 2 to 3 videos, 2 to 3 statics. And then for larger, for a little bit higher spend, we want to pick that up just a bit, right? Where we want, right. Yeah. So we want to, what's the numbers that you recommend?
I mean, if you're in that middle range, I would try and be testing maybe like upload a new batch of creative every 3 to 5 weeks. It could be, again, even a bit earlier in that 3-week category, but you should be testing more creative. So that could be somewhere closer to 5 to 10 images and 6 to 8 videos, for example. Okay. And then on those, I wouldn't go too crazy with audiences. Maybe test 2 or 3 audiences in that mix. You don't want to break it apart too much. If you're at around like, 20K a month, you should be able to get results on that A/B test after 30 days and understand, okay, what has performed well.
And then what do you recommend, like if you want to, because I love what you said about having that symmetry through the funnel, right? So making sure that the ads and like whatever it lands to, like as much as you can make that a seamless transition, the better. But obviously it's tough to be testing ads and testing landing pages. How do you recommend doing it in a way that's going to give you the most perfect, like recommendations, right? Because if we have so many moving parts, it's hard to know what is winning or what's not. So do you have any like systems that you use?
For A/B testing for a small business owner, you can, I think Google Optimize, I think that product became something else. But I would see if Google Optimize is still available. They used to have a relatively like low fidelity free trial tool for A/B testing. VWO is now like one of the bigger A/B testing tools that a lot of brands use. Dynamic yield is a good one if you're kind of in the middle range of A/B testing. Optimizely is also in that middle range for A/B testing. But you should be able to do some damage with VWO even if you're a small business. But yeah, I mean, I would have like a dedicated landing page where you can have an ad set in your campaign that's only driving to that ad. And there you can control the variables. So you can say, keep the same creative between those, the same audience. And all you're doing is one ad set has landing page A, the other ad set has landing page B. and you can do that landing page in a much more controlled ecosystem. Do
Mhm.
testing that way. And then in your other ad set, you can have ad creative A and landing page A, ad creative B and landing page A. So the landing page is the same, just the creative is different. So you can just build it out that way in your ad set. You can also, I like that way because then I just get more control over the funnel. You can also just do it where you have, maybe one ad unit with 5 different creatives, and then you just rely on a tool to bifurcate that
Mhm.
that traffic. That's also doable.
Interesting. And so do you feel like, okay, so and again, I think like having that step back and looking very consciously at that full funnel and what is the experience for the end user? What is that client journey? Like, I think sometimes, especially if you've been running ads for a while, I think that things get a little bit, just once you start kind of going in one direction and changing creative and whatever, sometimes you can forget to take that step back. And
Mhm.
oftentimes it's not until there's like a big pain point in terms of like, hey, revenue has really slowed down. It's like that's what forces you into taking a look at this full funnel. What are some of your recommended benchmarks for conversions on ads? So you had mentioned if we're looking at that 2.5 or 3% for ROAS, but what are some of the other benchmarks you think are really useful for founders to understand in terms of ad performance and also in terms of landing page conversions?
For sure. It depends a little bit on product category because price comes into play.
Yeah.
Higher ticket, for example, jewelry will have a lower conversion rate. But for your average e-commerce brand, where let's say your AOV, your average order value is between 50 and 100, somewhere in that range,
Yeah.
you should be looking to get a link click-through rate between 1.5 and 2. I'd say that's a solid click-through rate. That can actually be, that used to not be hard at all. That's actually sometimes now a bit difficult to get up to a 1.5 to 2 and hold that rate.
Yeah.
But that'd be good to get up to a link click-through rate of 1.5 to 2. Your link click or your visitor to add to cart conversion rate, if you can get that to 15 to 20%, that'd be great. You're going to be looking at a pretty healthy CPA. Your add to cart to purchase conversion rate, can you get that to about 20 to 25%? So if you can hit 1.5 to 2% click through rate, your visitor to add to cart at 15 to 20, and your add to cart to purchase at 20 to 25, you should be looking, and let's say your CPM on average, that one you can't really control. That's going to be, it could range a lot, but somewhere between 15 and 40 will be your CPM. You should be looking at a ROAS around that 2 or 2.5 with that AOV.
Yeah.
But it's important to drill in because sometimes I'll come in and the analysis will stop at our conversion rate is low. It's like conversion rate dropped, but you can look at each step and say, what is dropping? Is it your visitor to add to cart? Is it your add to cart to checkout? Is it your checkout to purchase? Sometimes it's your checkout to purchase because a payment method was broken, for example. Like maybe you had Apple Pay, but your API integration was expired and you didn't know, and you didn't have customers reaching out to you. Maybe it's your visitor to add to cart, in which case adding in like an add to cart, a quick add to cart functionality on your website could help, or bringing your product tiles closer to your homepage or your landing page could help. Yeah.
I love this advice. And I think it's the single most important thing for any marketer or founder to be focusing on is really paying attention to these conversion rates. And I recommend for everyone to look at them week over week. I know there's a lot of people that kind of look at the data month over month, but this point that you made about like payment APIs not firing properly, like I've had situations with clients where because we were looking at it over week over week, we were able to catch these things when that performance dips. But if you're only looking at that data month over month, you could be losing money like for days or even weeks in some case if you don't catch, right? Like pages aren't loading properly or buttons, links are broken. These things happen like a lot more frequently than we'd like to think. And that could be like, and oftentimes is totally affecting your conversions on your ads. And that's my other argument for, keeping your team. Like I'm a big advocate, which, personally, of bringing the whole team together. So founders, like if you are talking to your the marketing executors in silos and there's not a conversation and we're not looking at the data together, you're really at a disadvantage, because if you don't bring your ads person in and kind of let them in on what's going on to the end of their funnel, there's only so much that you could do on the front end, right? And oftentimes you could be working on the wrong problem. So if the conversion rates are low, but then you're realizing that because your landing pages are garbage and there's so many things to optimize there, you kind of putting pressure on your ads person is just never going to move the needle, because it doesn't matter how great your creative becomes. If there's something broken on the landing page, that's also, you're not going to be able to fix that as an ads manager, for example. So I think that there's that huge value of paying attention to that full funnel. And that is the most important thing to be focusing on, right? Making sure that we've optimized every piece of the journey for those conversions. And so if we find someone, like, talk to me a little bit, like in our last bit here, about this kind of CRO process. So you talked about you looking at mobile first. What are like some of the really, and you did talk about the PDP, the product description pages, but if someone's kind of looking at where do I even start, or they're feeling very overwhelmed, do you have like some advice on, how to get started? Because some people will say like, oh, my whole site is crap. Like, it feels very overwhelming. Do I need to totally redesign everything? What would you say to that founder?
Yeah, for the founder that is having success for maybe a few months now, and they feel lost in why am I not getting a better return? Why is my conversion rate low? First thing would be just go through your whole funnel as if you're a customer on desktop and on mobile, and try Safari and Chrome browsers. Like, literally go through it yourself on different devices and different browsers and make sure everything is working correctly. Secondly, add a session replay technology tool like Hotjar or FullStory. Those tools a session replay is basically you're getting like a screen recording of a user going through your website. It is like literally like you're sitting behind your user, watching them go through your website, and you get this screen recording. You can see where their mouse is hovering. You can see, and you can broadly start to paint some assumptions around, okay, it looks like, this button is causing some difficulty because I see a lot of people clicking it or hovering around it. Maybe FullStory is showing you a high invalid click count. It'll also give you a click map and a scroll depth. So maybe, you have a homepage and it's like 90% of people are just seeing your first viewport, and the bottom, maybe 2/3 of your page, only 10% of people are seeing it. But all you're doing is editing that bottom 2/3, and you're not seeing results. Of course you're not, because only 10% of people are even getting to your bottom 2/3 of your page. In the other case where, let's say you're going through a brand redesign, you've done all these things and you're still like, what is missing? It could be a market fit adjustment, it could be a price competition. I would use a tool like usertesting.com. I've used them a ton, even at the enterprise level. You can get like a free trial there. It's like 10 free users. And you can get someone, like an actual person. You can ask them questions, give them a prompt, and you get a recording of the user answering your questions, going through your website. And this is good because it's a little bit more detailed. The session replay technology, you can't get really like specific information. There's not like a voiceover, an actual person that is telling you things. You're kind of interpreting it and reading the sand and the impressions based on their activity. But on user testing, you'll get voiceover, recordings, detailed answers to prompts that you give. And you can even ask questions like, would you buy this product based on the price? Did you have any difficulty in buying the product? And this will emerge new questions, new solutions, new ideas based on things that you might not be able to get just from watching user testing or looking at your metrics in your funnel.
I love that. And I think, like, again, this is the work that we have to put into that. It's actually like the kind of boring stuff that not a lot of people want to do. I mean, obviously you love doing it, right? But I think that, when we have this stress and this panic that like things are not working, oftentimes these are the steps that you can take. And I have to say, like, I mean, we live and breathe marketing, right? But I would say, like, any old person who's a founder could go in and start looking at some of these things, and common sense will tell you, like, some easy upgrades you can make, or like even just bringing in someone that's like a friend to kind of look at it as an outsider. Like there are sometimes some really obvious things, but the problem is like, we don't even take 5 minutes to pay attention to it, which because we're rolling like as business owners, we're just focused on other things. And often like we don't maybe update our websites like frequently enough, or we don't kind of look at it at a lens of like, am I communicating the right thing properly? Oftentimes you don't have to go to get like the most experienced expert to do it all for you. There's some ways that you could get started by just like giving it a little bit of attention, right? And using some of these tools that you recommend. Because some of these answers could be quite obvious, right? Like if buttons are not showing up properly on mobile, like there's really like, I'm always often surprised when I go to websites and they're just so like, it's impossible to find like services for service providers, for example. Like there's no pricing, there's no place to book. Like it's a lot of it's common sense, but maybe it's not interesting for you. So maybe we need to hire someone like you, Jake, to do it for them. But it's not, I guess the point I'm trying to say is not rocket science. It's not impossible to really get some initial feedback on what may be stopping conversions, right? And then just also making sure you have the basic things set up, right? Like the abandoned cart sequences, and how are we really like making sure we're capturing the emails at the right point so we can continue to kind of push those processes. So can you talk a little bit on the basics of some email sequences that you think and I don't know if this is something that you look at when you're looking at the full funnel, but obviously emails do help with the funnel. So what are like kind of a checklist of some of the most basic things that are emails that we can be sending that will help add performance?
Sure. Number one on that list is definitely an abandoned cart or abandoned checkout email. Those, and having like a sequence for that. So don't just send like one, maybe 12 hours after an abandoned cart. Like follow that up with maybe like 3 or 4 emails in that whole sequence. Like keep hitting someone with an abandoned cart or abandoned checkout, and put some incentives in there, like include a 20% off dedicated promo to that user to convert them. They already added to cart, they already made it to checkout. They just need a little bit of a nudge. They could be waiting for, like, naturally, if you have a big enough data set, like a bespoke post where we had hundreds of thousands of subscribers, you naturally see higher conversion rates around the 15th of a month and around the beginning of the following month, because people get their paychecks around that time. So you can start to time out your email sequences around that paycheck period. So we saw lifts by correlating that with, of course, when people get their money, because people may be leaving products in their cart for a holiday that's upcoming, or because they're waiting for their next paycheck to buy something. You can start to try and send your emails around that cadence. I would also don't underestimate the power of a plain text email. Like in the same conversation with high polished versus native ads, email marketing gets lost too. I'm sure anyone listening can probably enumerate how many emails I just ended up moving to garbage without even reading it because it looked like a promotional email. Plain text emails are really powerful. Don't feel the need to go super promotional with every single one. Of course, you can have those and show off products, make it look a bit more editorial. But there's a lot of power in a plain text email, either as like an automated response or even in a transactional email. And then speaking of that, on the transactional emails, I've had, this is really a conversion rate question. It's more just a general brand question that helps with things like your NPS score, for example, your NPS. Make sure you're
so how likely are people to recommend you? Yeah,
correct. Like, make sure your transactional emails are sending. People want to know that their product is on the way, their product has arrived. Like, make sure your transactional emails are firing. Like, in the same way where the first step with CRO is to go through your own funnel on devices and browsers, put your own email into your own newsletter, your own checkout funnel, and get your emails that are firing, because they may not be firing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And I think that's a good place to kind of close, because I think the final word on all of this is that like you set it up, but this whole thing, like nothing in business is like a set it and forget it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from like really looking into your ads and making sure you have a good partner that you're working with to make sure that that is optimized. Looking at the performance of your website, again, making sure you have someone that is an expert that can give you advice and help make those recommendations. And same goes for email. And it's something that I really believe it's a constant process, but at least once a quarter, taking the time to really, look at all the technologies, making sure it's firing correctly, making sure that everything's doing what it's supposed to be doing, because that, of course, is going to affect everything. And then, of course, iterating and improving. I mean, my whole philosophy with marketing is that like we need to be mastering the basics, right? It's not about doing a lot of things like radically different or, chasing some kind of trend. A lot of it is like, we need our funnels set up properly. They need to be working, and we need to iterate and improve them, right? And to get all, make better creative, communicate more clearly, all of that stuff. So if with the understanding of that, it's like set up all of the stuff and then do your best to keep iterating and improving upon it. And that's where you start investing in your business in experts like you, Jake, to come in and go deeper, right? Oftentimes it's about going deeper into each one of these different tactics, like in executing the strategy to get that performance better and better and better. It's not about, okay, now let's jump on this new social platform or whatever, because that's going to like be the lever that's going to change everything. Right. It often doesn't happen that way. Okay. So Jake, tell us, where can we find you? Where can we hire you? Like how can people reach out to you?
Feel free to Google me. Just my name, Jake Madoff. You'll see a handful. If you want to learn more, you'll see a handful of articles and podcasts. Just to learn a bit more about my campaign style. If you want to work with me, my website's jakemadoff.io. And feel free to fill out a form there and we can get on the kickoff call.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I know everyone's loved this conversation. I'm so grateful for you to be on and share all your knowledge about optimizing all of it, right? I think that's going to be really helpful. There's a lot of really actionable things here. I hope people were taking notes, and hopefully we'll have you back on again, maybe in a couple of months, to tell us how everything's changing, because everything's always changing especially with ads. Which is a pain sometimes, but that's why we need people in our teams focused 100% on what is going on and what is changing. Because again, none of this is set it and forget it. So thank you so much, Jake.
We may have a good case study too.
Yeah, we may have a good case study to share on the podcast. That's a really good idea. Maybe we'll do that next time. Have a great weekend, Jake. Thanks for being on.
You too.
Okay, bye.
You did it. You made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for sticking around with me and listening all the way to the end. I really appreciate you as an audience member, and I hope that you found this helpful. If you did like this episode, it would mean so much to me if you subscribed, if you rate and review this podcast. It helps other people know that this podcast has something worth saying. It also would be super awesome if you could take a screenshot and share on Instagram and tag me at Ugly Ventures, UGLI Ventures, VENTURES. I am always so appreciative to hear from you, and I hope to see you back here next week